So the DeSantis campaign, writ large, just use that as a handle for unaffiliated or independent super PACs, and the campaign itself, just, the campaign messaging. Ron DeSantis supporters, regardless of from where the correspondence or communication is coming. So the DeSantis campaign going after Nikki Haley, and DeSantis himself on the Sunday show is going after both Haley and Donald Trump. Interesting. The Haley compilation, sort of your classic, who is the real Nikki Haley, what's the real deal about my opponent, and sort of a kitchen sink of your opponent's perhaps less popular statements with respect to the electorate in question. Here's a compilation of said for Nikki Haley.
I often say that the reason I got into politics was because of Hillary Clinton.
I went with my friend Eleanor Kitzman to a Furman leadership program where Hillary Clinton was speaking. And I walked out of there and I said, I'm running for office.
For too long, Republican and Democrat presidents dealt with immigration based on a quota. We'll take X number this year, we'll take X number next year, the debate is on the number. It's the wrong way to look at it. We need to go to our industries and say, what do you need that you don't have?
We need as many immigrants as we can.
Start to listen to your businesses and do what they need.
Years earlier, as South Carolina governor, Haley celebrated a deal that brought a business with ties to the Communist Chinese Party to her home state.
We want to thank Chairman Zong and everyone at the Jushi Group for allowing South Carolina to be the first location of your first U.S. manufacturing hub. We value partnership more than anything else, and we look forward to partnering with all of you.
In 2015, Haley ranked #1 among Republican governors in Chinese investment. Haley's administration oversaw $1.43 billion in Chinese investment in South Carolina.
When I was governor, they wanted to bring in a bathroom bill, a transgender bathroom bill, and I strong-armed and said, we are not going to have that in South Carolina.
What care should be on the table when a 12-year-old child in this country, assigned female at birth, says, actually, I feel more comfortable living as a boy? What should the law allow the response to be?
Well, I think the law should stay out of it.
Nikki Haley think we should be bringing in more refugees.
And America's always been sympathetic to the fact that you can separate civilians from terrorists, and that's what we have to do. I do not think we need to pull money from the UN. We don't believe in slash and burn. When I get into office, the first thing we have to do, social media accounts.
A huge issue that I'll deal with as soon as I get there is social media.
Every person on social media should be verified by their name.
We need to know exactly who they are, and they need to show their own name.
They need to verify every single person, and I want it by name.
Let's increase the gas tax by 10 cents over the next 3 years.
No one jumped in more forcefully or seemed angrier at America than former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. Quote, tonight I turned on the news and I am heartbroken, Haley wrote. It's important to understand that the death of George Floyd was personal and painful for many. In order to heal, it needs to be personal and painful for everyone. But wait a second, you may be wondering, how am I, quote, personally responsible for the behavior of a Minneapolis police officer?
So different people will react more strongly to some of those statements than others, of course. But it was that last one, the statement she made about the George Floyd case that you heard Tucker commenting on, that Ron DeSantis was asked about when he joined Jake Tapper over the weekend.
It's like watching the video is painful for Americans to see. And do you not think that empathy is an important quality for a U.S. president?
Of course it is. Nobody's saying that. But to say that the actions of one police officer means that Americans in Iowa or Texas or Florida, that it should be painful for them when they had nothing to do with it, that does not make any sense. And so that individual was arrested. He went through a criminal process. But that is not emblematic of police officers in general, much less the American public in general. And I would note, that was said at the time when we started to see the unrest in this country. And you had massive riots that have destroyed cities like Minneapolis. It's going to take decades for Minneapolis to be able to recover. So the response to that was totally out of bounds.
For more on this and a couple of other matters about election transparency, please be joined again by Ken Cuccinelli, National Chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative, former AG of VA, and again, also affiliated with the Never Back Down Super PAC that supports DeSantis. Ken, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, always good to be with you guys.
So, yeah, I mean, have you no empathy, sir? Jake Tapper wants to know. I bet that is going to be something that the other candidates, like a Chris Christie, will seize on a debate stage to suggest that Nikki Haley was right and that was a moment where she was trying to be a uniter.
I'm not sure that you're going to see Chris Christie leading the way and trying to be the most empathetic, but
yeah, well,
that would be interesting. But if the other candidates, as they have in the past, like Nikki Haley, want to attack Ron DeSantis because he believes in the police and is not supportive of what I'll call the movement that exploded out of the George Floyd killing, which you all saw in spades in Chicago. I mean, you had the Columbus statue, you had the cops who were clearly jumped. Mm-hmm. That was a premeditated ambush by a mob, and your then police chief gave one of the best press conferences laying it out with drone footage and everything, showing these so-called peaceful protesters, as the lamestream media wanted to call them, had bags of weapons, rocks, cans. They showed them all changing into their black amorphous clothing so they couldn't be identified. So you had it right there in Chicago, and Ron DeSantis is absolutely right to absolutely knock Jake Tapper out of the park on that one, and Nikki Haley along the way. But her response, Nikki's response on the George Floyd comment, was typical Nikki Haley. I mean, she's just a classic Republican surrender politician. We've seen this for our whole lives. Their instincts are Chamber of Commerce and surrender to the New York Times. And we don't need that. She's trying to paint herself as tough at the moment. She's got a 20-year track record that says otherwise.
Well, you're not supposed to be in this position, though. DeSantis is not supposed to be in this position of having to go chapter and verse on Nikki Haley 2 months before the Iowa caucus. So that's not where DeSantis was supposed to be. That's not where you want to be. So how do you make a move here at some point?
Well, of course, Governor Kim Reynolds just endorsed the Governor DeSantis. I'm going to keep the governor straight here.
Yeah.
And she's beloved in Iowa and has been all in campaigning for him since then. He's just about to finish the full Grassley, as they call it, going to all 99 counties. No other candidate has even tried to get around the state so much. And we have an extensive door-knocking operation in support of the governor. We're on our fourth pass of Iowa's likely voters. Nobody has ever done this before this thoroughly. So I think that his grinding away, the man is a workhorse, not a show horse. You want a show horse, you got Trump in the race. But and I worked for President Trump. I'm not anti-Trump, but he's not the best choice for president. He can't serve 8 years. He's slowing down. He's not the guy he was in 2016. And frankly, it's all about him instead of about changing America for the better, as DeSantis is focused on. So I think that breaks through. At this point, I think in 2015, Ted Cruz was in third place in Iowa, and he won Iowa. This is a much thinner field than 2016, which makes a big difference going forward. And I think that Nikki Haley doesn't have staying power. Trump obviously does have staying power, if for no other reason than he gets so much media coverage. But DeSantis, we've been working in states all the way into the March states, and his record is literally the best of any conservative of our lifetimes. Taxes, life, Second Amendment, knocking back higher education, which has been one of the most difficult institutions in America to deal with, protecting kids in schools, beating the teachers' unions. I mean, the list goes on. And of course, COVID, he was right and Trump was wrong in spades. Spectacularly so, protecting freedom. And that freedom difference is most interesting with Nikki's latest double down on social media. I want their names. None of these anonymous people. And I love her when she was falling backwards on that. She said, "Well, just for foreigners, not for Americans." Well, really, how do you know anonymous people online are American?
Well, so what's the path ahead, though, for Governor DeSantis? I mean, polls right now show Trump winning Iowa, maybe Chris Christie winning New Hampshire, then off to South Carolina.
Chris Christie winning New Hampshire? What poll shows that?
That's
no. These are 30-point races right now. Plus, come on.
Yeah. So Iowa polling has never been correct on caucuses.
It's not off by 40 points. I mean,
close,
come on.
I hear you, but you ask a question, I answer it, and the answer is he continues to grind away. And when people actually get to cast votes, then we get to the numbers that matter, which aren't polling numbers. We wouldn't all continue doing this if this was, a fruitless effort. And Trump has incumbent-like positioning, and I get that. We all get that. But the fact of the matter is the only one who can compete with him is Ron DeSantis, can also beat Joe Biden, and in fact runs ahead of polling, as we saw in Florida when we all thought, oh, there'll be a red wave across America. Well, there was a red wave in Florida, and that was it. And not only did Ron DeSantis win the biggest swing state by 19 points, he also increased his legislative majorities, and he helped 29 school board candidates get over the line. He didn't just win Miami-Dade by 10 points, which is amazing for a Republican. He helped take over a majority on the Miami-Dade school board. Look, this is a guy who's been literally the most conservative ever, and he's turned around and sold it to a very diverse electorate that is a lot like Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, states that Republicans need to win in 2024. And Donald Trump isn't positioned to do that. You can say poll this, poll that. Add the conviction from Washington, D.C. to those polls and tell me what happens. Add RFK Jr. to those polls where he gets anti-COVID votes from Trump more than Biden, because Trump's the one who put us on the path we were on. Those are not factored in. You need to be realistic here about what's going to happen in the next year. Conservatives are supposed to face reality, not deny it. And when you face reality, Ron DeSantis has far and away the best chance to beat Joe Biden between him and Trump, and only Ron DeSantis can compete with Donald Trump across the entire Republican electorate.
Let's get to the transparency, regardless of who the nominee is. There's this bipartisan legislation that's been sponsored to standardize the postal envelopes that contain ballots for the purposes of tracking and uniformity. I mean, okay, it doesn't exactly set my heart aflame. That legislation, comment on that specifically, and then also, again, generally, do we want to do a stop, look, and listen on what your handle is with respect to ballot integrity, generally speaking, particularly in the swing states for next year?
Yeah, so it is very rare that there's much the federal government can do that is useful in this space. We spent 21 and 22 fighting off an attempted Democrat takeover in Washington of all our elections. But the post office is federal. It is the responsibility of the federal government. And literally, I've read the bill. It's 2 pages long, which I wish more federal bills were. And all it does is standardize tracking of post office envelopes so you can keep track of ballots. And that is a transparency step. It's a step in the transparency direction. I agree with you. It doesn't rock the world, but it is not bad, and it is a step in the right direction. More importantly, your other question, where are we in the swing states and all the states relative to 2024? And generally speaking, we are better off than we were going into the 2020 election. The negative counterexample to that is Michigan, but in Arizona, Wisconsin, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, we are better off than we were going into the 2020 election. There's any combination of things. Getting rid of the Zuckerbucks, where so-called nonprofit money from Mark Zuckerberg was used to do Democrat voter turnout by paying government entities to do that. Over half the states have banned that now. Drop boxes have been wiped out in Wisconsin. For now, that fight continues, but that's an improvement. Same as in Georgia and Florida. They've been either eliminated or secured. Texas can say the same thing. North Carolina just passed. It took them 3 years to do it, but they just passed an omnibus election reform bill over the veto of the governor. It took one flip of a Democrat to become a Republican in the legislature there to get a veto-proof majority. And so we've seen Arizona, a whole bunch of little things. They're not mass mailing out ballot applications. They've put steps in place like Georgia to clean up their voter rolls. And the granddaddy of them all, the Major League Baseball All-Star Game, is going back to Atlanta as an apology to Georgia for calling them all racist for cleaning up their election laws.
How about that? Okay, well, so there's no reason, there's every reason to believe that the Republican nominee can win those states if they do the blocking and tackling, the vote by mail programs, and the other
they need to do the
field
tackling.
work.
Absolutely.
But there's no to people who think it's rigged, we'll never win, we can't win these states, and so on and so forth. You say that is not true.
I say that is not true, and in fact, where we haven't finished with cleanup laws, like my home state of Virginia. In Virginia in 2021, they secured the ballot effectively by recruiting 4,000 new people to be election officers. And everybody listening to the three of us this morning can do this. Your local election office brings citizens in to run the poll books, to count the ballots, to check the envelopes from absentee ballots. All of those things are done by citizens who just step into the role during the election season. And I would urge everybody listening to get trained and do that. And you'll actually be paid a little bit of money, believe it or not. This is not a volunteer position. And there are groups out there like the Election Integrity Network that starts with the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, where they train people up to do this for your state. And you guys are heard across multiple states, but the fact of the matter is the folks listening to us, this is something they can do. And it worked with no change in the law. I'm telling you, as a former attorney general, more penalties don't keep people from cheating. And I got to say this part slowly. The probability of being caught doesn't change people's behavior, but their belief in the probability of getting caught changes their behavior. And when our folks flood the election offices, the other side gets nervous. They actually freak out.
We got to leave. We got to leave it. We got to leave it there. Thanks so much for that. Appreciate that. Ken Cuccinelli, National Chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative and former Virginia AG. Thanks, Ken. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and he joined us on our Turnkey.pro answer line. Coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Zelensky says the Russians may attack the Balkans to misdirect away from Ukraine. Stephen Bucci from the Heritage Foundation will join us at 7:07 to discuss.
And it is now 7 a.m. WIND Chicago.
Will Israel work out a deal to get Hamas to free some hostages? I'm Dave Anthony, Fox News.
If we are closer, and I hope we are, but I'm not sure we are, but if